all the attendees on Zoom. It is an absolute pleasure and privilege to host the panel members that we have today. We kicked off the ABSIP Transformation Series 2 weeks ago in response really to what we are seeing as some narrative that is growing in the financial services sector that suggests that perhaps transformation is not happening in the way that we would like to see it happen. And we thought as ABSIP that it is important as an advocacy group within the financial services sector to really start a conversation and a deep and hopefully candid conversation around where are we really when it comes to transformation, what have we achieved really when it comes to transformation, and what do we need to be doing more of so that we can ensure that we achieve the objectives of transformation in a sustainable manner, and what should we be looking at stopping to do so that we do not see a reversal of some of the gains that we have made over the years. So that the purpose really and the approach is for us to ensure that we focus on solutions and not, whilst acknowledging the challenges, what we want to ensure that at the end of this 5-part series, we really come out with very tangible case studies of what has worked, so that we can then start working towards developing a blueprint of transformation within the financial services sector. So our group of panelists was very carefully selected precisely because we believe that they can share with us, very real, tangible case studies of, firstly, what they have seen and observed in the sector, what has worked whether it's in their individual cases or in cases that they will share with us this evening. So with those remarks, I would like to introduce you all to the panelists, not that they need any introduction, but just to make sure that we follow the right protocols. And then I will invite each panelist to share some initial thoughts on the topic that we are discussing today for about 10, maybe 15 minutes at most each. And then we will go into a conversation. You will have noticed that we extended this to 2 hours because we realized that the issues are important and they are complex and they require sufficient discussion. So I will start off with Dade Sizwe Ngasana, who is the founder of Future Nations Schools. But we all know that he was the former CEO of Telkom, and after that, he took over as the CEO of the First Rand Group in 2010. So I'm sure he will be able to share with us very good insights on that journey, what he found, and what he thinks the issues are within the financial services sector that we need to be addressing. We also have Meg Gloria Serobe, who is the founder of Wiphold, one of the pioneering investment holdings companies that is women-owned and led, and she also is the chairman of Solidarity. And of course, Meg Gloria used to work in banking herself when she was still an employee, so she does come with that experience of what it used to be like in her days. She was also part of the formulation of the Financial Services Charter right at the beginning. I remember because I used to be sitting on the other side of the table when I was in government, and she was wearing her Financial Services Charter Council hat and would have very robust engagement. And of course, having invested in particular Old Mutual and Nedbank, she would also come with a lot of insights around what she has seen wearing that hat as a director as well. And then we've got Ms. Funeka Monjana, who is the CEO of consumer and high net worth individual clients at Standard Bank, who herself has been in banking for some years now, having joined Standard Bank in 2008 and has risen over, along the ranks within the bank and finding herself in the current position. So she's probably also the new kid on the block on this panel members. So hopefully she can also share with us her own journey as a professional in the financial services sector and in banking in particular. Hopefully also sharing with us how she found the experience, how she was supported, how she managed to stay on for so many years and climb the ladder as she has. And perhaps talk broadly around what she thinks has worked across the bank in terms of their efforts around transformation. And then we've got Sisbongi Kunene, who is the Managing Director of the Banking Association of South Africa, herself a former banker as well. And she will share with us, of course, just in particular, the report that the Banking Association released recently, the transformation report that highlighted, certain trends that are taking place when it comes to transformation across the board, and really how we should be interpreting the outcome of the report, how we should be reading the results, and hopefully what we should be doing again going forward in order to ensure that what we are starting to see as a trend that suggests that we are moving in the right direction on transformation is tangible, is deep enough, and is solid. So with that introduction, I would like to maybe kick off with Sisbongi to ask that she shares with us some of her insights and thoughts based on some of the background that I've provided and the briefing that we had. Sisbongi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Polo. It is an honor to be on this panel with the other panelists. I'm going to talk briefly on the BASA transformation report and leave enough space so that we are able to take questions and we're also able to engage with everybody. Disclaimers first. So this work covers, BASA has got 35 members, but the work that we presented in the report covers 18 banks. And the data that we have was collected from our members. And what we present as ownership data, it is weighted by banks' total assets, which then goes on to determine the industry aggregates. It's a comprehensive analysis of 4 years. It's not just 1 year. So I would want us, whatever questions we may have about it, to keep in mind that it is a trend analysis of 2016 to 2019. And in terms of how we have gone about capturing the issues, these were the subtopics we were interested in. We wanted to have a sense, what is the progress on ownership, on management control, skills development, preferential procurement, empowerment financing, supplier development, financial inclusion, and others. When we look at the period where we are now in 2021, we are in the COVID era, and the South African economy is quite weak. The growth that was recorded in 2019 being 0.2, and it had followed what we had in 2018 and 2017, 1.3, 0.8 successively. So in terms of the banking environment, it's been a worsening credit environment, and the levels of consumer confidence and business confidence have also taken a knock. So we know that the impact on transformation out of all of this is that with an economy in distress, there's not going to be a rosy picture on transformation, because it's quite difficult for banks to incur the costs of developing skills, developing, doing consistent supplier development, increasing lending volumes in such an environment. But we do note some really pleasing highlights, notwithstanding the operating environment being quite poor. In terms of bank ownership, the numbers have improved. We now have 7 banks which have majority Black directors, which have increased. And we have, for the first time, levels of management in banking, being particularly middle management, being 65% Black. And this is notable because we are looking at all tiers of management, junior, middle, and top senior. And to see that the cumulative number of positions that are available at management has grown significantly for Black professionals is quite pleasing. We also noted that in terms of supplier development, there was notable expenditure increase by all banks. And the skills development is probably the most pleasing, because there, what we are noticing is that Black women's skills development as a pool of all skills development spend has increased significantly. In 2016, it was 1.6 billion. By 2019, it was 2.4 billion. And lastly, spending on consumer education also increased in the period by 18%. So these numbers do not really speak to each of the individual banks, because I'm anticipating that the questions would want to know who owns what is the percentage. So I'm going to talk a little bit in terms of trends. In terms of trends, ownership levels remained above the financial sector code targets in terms of all that we're capturing, except for economic interest. We know that there was a marginal improvement in economic interest and in women's economic interest in particular, and voting rights, but that is not significant. It's just a marginal increase. And if we look at the directors, where the story I started with, where we say we now have significant improvements, we noted that in 2019, all targets and all segments were breached in the positive way, because we increased from 38% to 44%, and the Black board members as a percentage of all directors have increased to 50% from a starting position of 37%. So we know that that 13% increase in 4 years is a significant achievement. Now, there will be better numbers which are not captured in what I'm presenting, because I only end at 2019. So I'm not going to emphasize the numbers, since we are now in 2021. We've got Funeka in the panel who can speak maybe on the new numbers. So what I want to go into now is that the issues which were of interest to the ABSIP board, firstly, was that these positive trends were achieved despite quite a difficult economic and business conditions. And we are starting from a point of view where we are saying it's going to be increasingly challenging going forward to fast track achievement on the FSC goals, because that also depends on economic growth in the country. And of course, banks do know that there's still a lot that needs to be done. So this is not in any way a measure of self-praise. However, what we want to put, or maybe just to underscore, is that we are aware that all the increases and the improvements that we are recording insofar as transformation of the banking industry has to be done in a sustainable manner, which means that as we continue to improve, the banking environment as well must be sustainable, and it must continue to have it must continue to provide appropriate financial services and create an inclusive environment that would see South Africa having inclusive growth. This is not the first report that BASA is doing. What is new with this report is that we have collated the data in the state of transformation in banking. And we have cleaned out a lot of noise that was in the system in the past. So all the facts that were put in this report, we could go back line by line on what the issues are and the evidence of sustainable transformation that we are presenting is something that we're quite proud of. And we would like to invite this audience to just interrogate with us, because we're not coming from a position of saying, yay, the best has been done. We are saying that we are at this level. Let us interrogate what is still missing. And let's have a conversation which says, how do we address the experiences of professionals in the organizations that we represent as BASA? Thank you. So I'll stop here, Pulu, and wait my turn for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sis Bongi. Sis Bongi, would it be possible to turn your camera on unless it's creating connectivity issues for you?
I wasn't sure whether it was going to create any, but it's,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And you can do it when you speak. You don't have to have it on all the time. So thank you very much for sharing those statistics with us, because I think they are an important part of the conversation. They give us a sense of what we are seeing, and it will really allow us to have a conversation around what we are seeing in terms of what is being reported versus what people are experiencing, so that we can start the interrogation work that you spoke about. So thanks for that. Gloria, you've been around for a while, and I'm not talking about your age, I'm talking about, in the sector. You've been an employee, you have been an investor, and as I said earlier, you have been part of the conversation around transformation for a very long time. So I'm curious to know, what was it like before, when you started the charter process, and what have you seen, and in particular, what have you seen in terms of the implementation of the charter within the financial services sector, the challenges that you would have come across as a stakeholder, a key stakeholder in the sector, and what do you think works, particularly when it comes to the people aspects of transformation?
Thanks, Pulu. I'm always quite keen to tell people I'm 62 years old, so that when I speak like an old person, they must understand and forgive me. Yes, I've been around because of age. I think the first thing I wanted to say is that at a generic level, it's 31 years now since the new South Africa. What's interesting is that the leader of business today is also 30-something years old, whether it's black or white. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that the transformation conversation today is a bit different from then, there's a lot of reinforcement of exactly what we are actually transforming. Because if we just meandering and we don't know what we are trying to undo, we will follow the wrong knots. I'm saying this quite seriously because apartheid was quite detailed about how to exclude. They had their best brains on this, and they had their most monitoring mechanisms as to how to make sure you exclude people. They were very good at it. And so transformation means that we also have to be quite detailed about it and how to include and what knots we are trying to undo. In the absence of that, we are going to lose each other. And so when I mention the leader of today and the reinforcement of the message, is to say that whereas it was natural for me then in the 90s to know where I come from and what happened to me, today it's not as natural. And I think that conversation in all the organizations, I would really like it to be done and be had, as it might be boring to some, but we need to talk about what exactly are we trying to shift. A simple example would be that a CEO of a big accounting firm today must know one way to exclude Blacks then was to refuse them articles into their accounting firms. They couldn't write the board exams. Sizwe and them can talk about that. And so you will find a lot of Blacks with a lot of honors in accounting, BComs. They couldn't sit for the board exams because they could not be articled. And that was a requirement to sit down for the board exams. And so the young leader today, it's a funny detail that he will not have that. And therefore, even as he leads or as she leads a big accounting firm, she's not looking out for this problem because it sounds weird at this point. And we need to have these conversations on the table and repeat them again and again. But it also means that there has to be some kind of brief and mandate to our colleagues, to our members, as they go to these places to say, yes, you are there on merit, but this is what we are trying to undo. Any opportunity you've got, if you are sitting in the credit committee of a bank, do the right thing because this is how Blacks were excluded. And so use that credit process too to actually force the inclusion. And I'm just harping on this because I don't think we're having this conversation because we should have it. The second point is that one ended up being so involved with all these things, financial services charter and so on specifically, is that the banking sector, the life business, the retirement business, all three of them, all over the world, they dictate how the economy goes. They are the major investors. You can go to any country, it's the same. They dictate and they show the direction of where things must go. What that means is that if you are in any of these three sectors, you are in a privileged position to actually do meaningful transformation for that economy. But you've got to know first what is the history, but it also means that you've got to know what are the instruments in here. And to know the instruments, you must make the time to go through the instruments. And so you can't take it at the top and just be a boss and you don't know what's going on below you and think you're going to make meaning out of it. These are complex businesses. This is very easy to hide behind all manner of things and not to transform. And so we have to be careful about what we're doing with these positions when we are in these jobs and make sure that we know, if you are in a bank, you know what it means to look after the depositor. You also know what it means to look after a transformation. And none of these must not be sustainable. They must not be fleshy. You must do the right thing. and whether there's policyholder behind the life business, there's beneficiary behind the retirement companies, you have to look after both. And so back to the organization as in ABSIP, I would say that let's have conversation on both sides of the equation. Let's have strong conversation. And if any of us makes it difficult for transformation to go forward, we have to sit them down, have a strong conversation about this, and of course, quickly go back into rehabilitation if there is any rehabilitation to be done. But let's not have a soft conversation when any of us actually makes retardation of this progress about whatever. The last point I wanted to say is that because I have worked for two companies, one of them is Munich Re and one of them is Standard Bank. Based on my age, in the 80s and in the 90s, I was not surprised that those two companies can be the one to deliver Black leadership in the country. Because from that long ago, they actually groomed and cooked and did whatever you want to do and to build them. They were part of the pipeline, the timber, whatever you want to call it. And so maybe where we should have this conversation today is when somebody is in that leadership position and gets derailed or gets trapped into all manner of terrible experiences like we have seen, which is why you are having this transformation series. We have to make sure that they are grounded on both sides. We had, just the last point, in our time, I knew that if something went wrong for me, ABSIP and ABASA will be there for me. BMF will be there for me. I knew that. At the same time, when they came to see me, whether as an FD of Transnet or in whatever form, I knew that I'm talking to my siblings. And in the end, they had interest for me to succeed. I also had interest for them to succeed. Both of us, we knew the background, that we're coming from a background of exclusion. And we knew the detail of that. We knew how to make it work, that kind of an inclusion. So if one point I can make then on what can we say about how has it worked? We have lost some bit of time in the process. As much as I'm saying 31 years, we've lost some time. We need to regroup again and claw back on that time, because at some stage it looked like it's happening. And then lately it looks like it's wobbly again. And I just want to have a conversation about how we should bring it back and actually reinforce that. Thank you very much, Pulu.
Thank you very much, Gloria. I like the idea of let us have the conversation on both sides, because we don't. We take it for granted that now that Pulu is the CEO of ABSA Bank, when she gets there, she's going to make the right decisions. And that is not always the case. We don't call each other to account. We make noise when Pulu then gets removed from that position without having engaged with her when she was there to say, so what are you doing for the cause? So I think that's a very important conversation, and we'll come back to that. But this way, you joined the First Rand Group in 2010 as the CEO. So this would have been just about 7 years after we started the implementation of the Financial Services Charter. Would you share with us, you being parachuted in banking, I'm told that the preferred route is to build your own timber, for people to then get to the highest echelons. In your case, it was a parachuting in from Telkom into a bank. What was that experience like? What did you find? What kind of support did you have? And what do you think made you succeed in that role?
Thanks, Madam President. In answering your question, I'll maybe just pick up from where let me call it Tomato, my chairman of the Solidarity Party. I'll pick up from where she left on just to provide a bit of context of how I ended up there and how I ended up being parachuted, because I think context is really important. So in fact, Madam President, I joined First Rand from Telkom in 2006, okay, beginning of 2006.
Okay.
And that time, that year is quite relevant, and I'll talk to it in the context of also what, Sibongi presented in terms of where the sector is in terms of the financial sector charter and the performance and so on. You'll recall that the first part or first iteration of the financial sector codes was in 2002, 2003. Okay, that was the first part. And that financial sector charter created certain conditions. Obviously, it created conditions for transformation. And there were a lot of debates, if you recall, during that time in refining what that FSC was going to look like and what the targets were going to be and so on and so forth. I was the direct beneficiary of that process. I'll tell you why. Because I was sitting on the board of First Rand from 2002 and we were part of those discussions of where the FSC was going. And obviously, I think being born at the right time, there's nothing magical about me. I was just born at the right time. I was at the right time, at the right place, in that I was finishing my term at Telkom and sitting at the board of First Rand at the same time. And obviously I understood the company, but as a non-executive director, and those are very different things, to sit as an executive and sit as a non-executive director. But anyway, to cut long story short, I ended up at First Rand because, if you recall, 2005, 2006 was a time when the financial sector as a whole started then doing transactions around ownership, management, and various other categories of the FSC, which is what Bongi was talking about earlier. So when you talk about management and control, I was essentially the direct beneficiary of the implementation of the FSC at the time. And I just want to make the point here that if you look at what happened in 2005, 2006 particularly, you'll recall that a lot of, in fact, almost all the banks and insurance companies concluded their BE deals in 2005, 2006, okay, including First Rand. So First Rand, Standard Bank, Nedbank, ABSA, Sanlam, Old Mutual, all of them concluded deals around 2005, 2006. So there was an ownership process or transfer of ownership in line with the FSC at the time, as well as attempts at that stage to deal with management and control, to deal with skills development and all the other categories of the FSC, including empowerment financing and so on. So why I'm making that point is it illustrates the importance of policy. It illustrates the importance of what happens when government creates an enabling environment to drive transformation in our country. So, and let me talk about my 10-year period at First Rand. So I was at First Rand from 2005, as I said, till I retired at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. Okay, so during that time, I get into a company, and this company has a particular culture, okay? And the context is really important here. The culture of First Rand, even today, is what is called, everybody talks about the First Rand owner-manager culture. Why? Because there were three founders, G.T. Ferreira, Laurie Tipinara, and Paul Harris, who were the founders, and they sort of created this culture within the group of entrepreneurs. So you were entrepreneurs within the group where it doesn't matter. At the time when I joined, there was still Momentum, Outsurance, Discovery, F&B, West Bank, and RMB. So these businesses were run essentially in a very highly decentralized fashion. So they sat there and they were like conductors of an orchestra, and they did a very good job of it. So the first thing that happened when I came in, they decided, in fact, when I came in that, they were going to, separate the insurance companies from the banking group, which is what then happened with Momentum, Discovery, and Outsurance that were taken out into RMBI and with a different control structure. So I then took over when Paul Harris retired as the CEO of the banking group, okay? Which was F&B, was Bank, and RMB. And then we established, Ashburton afterwards. The importance of that story is that you sort of come into this, and Tomato talked about growing your own timber. And that culture is still in existence at First Rand, but within the context of the owner-manager culture and within the context of an environment where these divisions, there were divisions, they're not separate companies at all. They're not separate companies, they're just divisions, were pretty independent, if you like. And for me, one of the first things that I then did was, well, I'm not going to come in and just be a figurehead. So I'm going to tamper with this owner-manager culture. I'm going to tamper with it so that we have better control from the center, in other words, at First Rand, in terms of what goes on. In other words, the strategies of the group, the coordination of those strategies across the different businesses, because that wasn't there before. These businesses, that's why you had these businesses competing amongst themselves. That's why you had Outsurance competing, for instance, in short term with Momentum competing with Discovery. So competition internally was allowed because these businesses, for all intents and purposes, could have been completely independent. Okay, so we changed the strategy and the board approved it that, well, we couldn't continue operating. At least I didn't want to continue to operate on that basis because it became very difficult. They could do it successfully because they were founders, they were shareholders, they could sit on these boards and direct them. Their power was different as shareholders, even on the board, than if you're coming in as an executive, manager now into that role. So for me, and we took, in fact, even before I joined, we probably took about a year negotiating how this was going to work. I wrote it down in detail to say, well, based on what I understand, having sat as a non-executive director, I cannot continue operating the way that they operated. And we came to an agreement in terms of how this was going to work and what my relationship with the board and my relationship with these divisions was going to look like, and what the accountability structure and the reporting structures were going to look like with me and also with them, because clearly you had a situation here which can be very untenable, where GT had been the CEO of the group, Laurie Diepenhout took over from him, followed by Paul Harris. And I come into this group, we have these three, men who've been shareholders and owners and managers, and I don't have shares, I don't have the same kind of power. So the only power I can rely on is the board power that they give me with delegated authorities. And we had to change that because it was very loose, if you know what I mean. The delegations were very loose, including who gets appointed, how the people get appointed. It was a very sort of closed thing. If the three of them agreed, the board would simply, yes, of course, the board would do its job, but you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So we had to change a lot of things just to say, well, we have a different governance structure. We need a different governance structure. We need a different operating model in the group. And the consequences of all of this is that clearly it would have been very difficult to do certain things if that was not in place. Why I'm saying all of this is that, in the growing, there were people that were already in the pipeline to take over in the divisions. And yes, of course, you go through the process of, sort of advertising positions as well as interviews and so on. But, the people who are successors are almost clear, if you know what I mean, because I didn't have a lot of time to grow another set of timber, if you know what I mean. So there are things that I could do at the head office, such as, the CFO, people in HR, people in audit and risk and compliance and all of those things. And certainly change the profile in terms of appointing Black people and women in those positions. But the dice, if you know what I mean, the dice was already cast in terms of what was going to happen in the three big divisions. In other words, in RMB and and FNB, as well as in Westbank. So it just gives you a context, and you have to lead within that context. You must understand the wars you can fight and the battles you can win in that context, and you do the best you can. But I think it was important just to talk about that. So there are two things. One is the impact of policy that got me there, which is the FSC, and I'm going to come back to that. And the second one is, the context within which you operate, which was different from a telecom context, as an example, which was very different. So, and let me just talk about the gazetted FSC now. I mean, clearly, if you look at the categories in the context of transformation, there are a couple of points I just want to make. And yeah, I mean, the Banking Association has done a report, but we have to agree, and ABSIP was very involved in the current gazetted FSC. We must agree that the FSC has done as much as it can. I don't think we're going to see more improvement in terms of transformation from the current FSC. We're just not going to do that. Because why? Because if you look at management and control, which is defined very broadly, it only accounts for 15 out of 100 points, okay? So, and banks, all the banks can pretty much, they are where they can be and they're comfortable with it. They're not going to, change things and play cartwheels to change transformation because of the charters. They're just not going to do that. They're going to do it because, maybe just going back to the Standard Bank story, because there's a philosophy, there's a broader idea about transformation and an embracement of transformation, across those banks, not because the FSC says so. So those people who just want to tick the box have ticked the boxes already. They've done whatever they needed to do. So we're not going to. We have to look elsewhere for transformation. Is the point I'm making.
Yeah.
And if we look at the economy of this country, I mean, this applies to the rest of our economy because we have ownership patterns that really have not changed. They've changed for certain people, or maybe certain people have benefited, and I'm one of those, as I mentioned earlier. But we're not going to change fundamentally the ownership patterns of South Africa, where white people still control the economy. We have a big government and we have big labor. We're not going to change that through the FSC. But I think there is an opportunity to do something elsewhere. And I think when we talk about transformation here, I think we have to also think just beyond transformation as we just look at it in terms of the codes and talk about the cultures in financial services. And there are different cultures. Let me just talk about investment banking. So investment banking throughout the world is characterized by cultures of celebrating those people who make money for the bank, okay? It's just as simple as that. People who make money for the investment banks, it doesn't matter where you look in the world, are the ones who are celebrated. And the culture in investment banking is particularly against women. I mean, you see just this discussion going on last week and this week with JP Morgan and some of the American investment bank, that are asking people to go back to the office. Why? Because investment banks, there's this culture of 100-hour work weeks. And you've got to be in the office until 11 o'clock every night. And that's how you socialize with your boss. That's how you get promotions. And it doesn't work for the majority of women. It doesn't matter that you're black or white. It just doesn't work. It's even worse, actually, when you're a black woman. It just doesn't work. I mean, I remember when my wife was at HSBC. She would come back at 2 a.m. in the morning. You're like, you don't know what's going on here. But I understand. understand she's working until 2 a.m. in the morning. The point I'm making is it really just doesn't work for women, but it also prejudices a lot of young Black, even men professionals, because if you live somewhere far and you have to work until late, and clearly there's a culture there, which is it's who you know. Who gets you into a deal, is not a democratic process. It's about who works on a deal, who's a rainmaker, and the rainmaker determines who they're going to get into that team. And the same applies whether you're in trading, whether you're in corporate finance, whether you're in private equity. That's just how things work. And unless that culture changes, it's going to be difficult to drive transformation in investment banks. And clients have a big say here. And to the extent that we haven't transformed the economy, in other words, it's still owned the way that it is, you're not going to have a lot of Black people in teams that are deal makers or rain makers. It's just not going to happen. Okay, so unless you transform the economy, that's just not going to happen. Yes, that's why you find Black people in retail, in vehicle finance, because obviously you have customer-facing people, and there's an increase in number of Black customers and that kind of thing. That's the reality of the situation. Okay, that's the reality of the situation. And the same with the insurance companies and so on. You're going to find, Africans, including women, in those areas where you serve your people, including government. So clearly, all banks and insurance companies, where you deal with government, that's where you're going to find Black people. Okay, so that's just how it is. And I think we then need to say to ourselves, as ABSIP, how do we make a contribution in transforming our economy? I think we're done with the FSC. I don't think we can go back and reopen that discussion. I do think organizations such as ABSIP, ABSA, and so on can and should play a much bigger role in how we change the ownership patterns in the country. I just go back and, you remember Minister Tito Mboweni released a document towards the end of 2019, which was called the Strategy for SA Economy. And it was talking about some of the same things, the ownership patterns and that kind of thing. I think understanding the political economy for organizations such as ABSIP is going to be really important. I'll tell you why, because let me just give you an example. If you look at, which banking licenses have been issued recently and to whom, and whether there's any transformation that, whether it's a prudential regulator or the FSCA, it doesn't really matter. The prudential regulator obviously is in charge of issuing banking licenses, but I don't think there's a particular focus on making sure that we're creating an ecosystem in the financial services that ensures that Black people own a meaningful stake in the economy. I don't think there is. And it's even sad, even sadder, when you see development financial institutions, and I've had the displeasure of dealing with at least 2 of them, who kill Black businesses. And I say this very seriously. When you see at fintech companies that are owned by Black people fall over because one of our DFIs takes 2 years to give finance and then they renege or whatever. I've had the displeasure. I'm in schools now, our own schools, and I can tell you now, dealt with more than one DFIs in this country who take more than 2 years and actually impose conditions that are even worse than what the commercial banks are going to impose on me. And not that the commercial banks themselves are better. And I would have thought, because I was CEO of a bank, it would be easy for me to get money to build schools. I can tell you, I was so wrong. It just doesn't work. So I'm just saying, there are areas in policy, legislation. Let me just give you an example. All banks have a development bank license, but none of them really use it. Why? Because no one cares, including a prudential regulator. If they use those development bank licenses, they could have funded a lot more SMEs, including people who are, Black people in the financial sector as a whole. So I do think there are levers that require obviously capacity at ABSIP, to build research capacity, to understand policy, to understand legislation and regulations, and the levers that are stopping the change in the ownership patterns in our country. And we can go a long way in changing a lot of things that have a direct impact on, including transformation in terms of, management and control in our country. I do think ABSIP must continue advocating for transformation at all levels. I do think it's important for you to even understand the pipeline. I'm speaking at an event next week about mathematics. The numbers of Africans who are passing mathematics at 60% and above is falling like a rock. I don't want to even mention the numbers here. So where are you going to get bankers, and all these people, actuaries that we need in financial services if we're not producing African kids with maths? And all of them are taking, or most of them are taking maths literacy. We're not. So understanding those kind of levers is important. I'm busy doing a review for SAICA right now, which shows that another terrible story. Because in certain cases, it's not racism. In certain cases, including in the banks, it's our own people. I mean, I can just talk about the African bank case study. I know things are confidential and so on and so forth, but I know some of the horrible things that happened there, not perpetrated by white people. So yeah, I think sometimes we've got to look at ourselves in the face. Thank you.
Sure. Butsizwa, thank you so much for that. I mean, there's a lot that you have surfaced, in your remarks, and one of the things that we have really been trying to figure out is when you do then get, whether you are being parachuted into an organization or you rise up the ranks, but I think more when you're coming from outside in, and you find an established culture. And because of course, you respect yourself and you think you've got value to add, you certainly want to change things so that, indeed you are in control. And we have seen a case recently, I will not mention who, everybody around here can make up their own minds who, but we've seen a case of somebody who came in, and I suspect very much found a very well-established culture and way of doing things, and potentially was not as successful as you were in getting the powers that be to support you in making the changes that you felt were necessary for you to become effective in your job. So it's one of the things that we're trying to figure out, to say, what does that kind of support look like practically, to make sure that you don't bring people in and then they get spit out by the system, because the system does spit people out in one form or the other. So I think it would be good to have that kind of conversation. And I think the points you make around the charter is not likely to give us more results than what we are seeing. And I think that is the realization that we have come to. And that's why we have said, let us have this conversation that says, what needs to be true for us to say that we are really transforming this economy outside of the bounds of the charter, because the charter, in our view, is quite flawed. The framework that we use is quite flawed, because it says that we are achieving certain outcomes, but anecdotally, when you talk to Black professionals, they tell you a very, very different story. So I think these are things that, and of course, I think the conversation around being intentional, actually talking, as ABSIP going and talking to the DFIs and saying, guys, we need to change how we do things, because this is what we're trying to achieve. Don't forget that. So that we, so I think we will take on the challenge, and I think we'll unpack these issues a little bit further on. I'd like to invite Funeka, who I referred to as the new kid on the block. So Funeka, the system doesn't seem to have spit you out yet, because you've been there at Standard Bank for 13 years now. So quite curious to hear your own experience and what has made you stay? What is the kind of environment and support and maybe culture that that we can say hello to that person as well.
Working from home.
You are in their space, so we must respect their space. So what has your experience been, and what do you think has worked, maybe in your personal situation or even broadly across a Standard Bank? And I mean, Meg Gloria has already indicated that, in her view, one of the reasons why, you know, Standard Bank and Munich Re would have succeeded in their transformation journey in a sustainable way is that it actually was not about BBBE. It was just about the culture, from what I can see. So I'm curious to hear what your experience has been.
Thank you very much, Sisi. And good evening to about 268 people on the line. It's so wonderful. And it's so wonderful to also be a part of the panel with Sis Bongi, with Sis Gloria, as well as Uputsizwe. I've learned a lot already. I think everything that has been said resonates with me because my experience is slightly different. I am literally, you know, I consider myself to be part of this golden generation. You know, this golden generation that finished school in 1995, you know, or let's say 93 to 95, 96, the most hopeful time in this country. I finished articles at the time with Thabo Mbeki, the then president Thabo Mbeki was talking about the importance of affirmative action. And I made partnership fairly early on. I was 27 years old. And it wasn't just me, I was just a part of a group. So a big part of my story, Sisi, is just being a beneficiary of the tears and all the difficulties and all the pain that multiple generations of leaders that came before me, Abo Sisbongi, Mam Gloria, as well as Putsizwe, I have so much to thank for the career that I am having. I hope that long may it continues. You know, these places are quite delicate. I think that the truth about senior leadership is that it's often short and violent, and one must sort of accept that it comes with the territory, you know. I think a very big part of my journey as well is that I joined Standard Bank. Standard Bank is my second employer. So I think choosing an employer is very similar to choosing a husband. You know, you don't get it right first time, but you must not always, but you must choose right. Because the environment that you are in, you know, whenever we see a beautiful tree, it's often an outcome of the forest that it's in. So I think that the environment, Standard Bank is definitely one of those places. I joined in 2008. I was a CFO of a retail bank. I decided to join as a CFO because it's something that as a CA you can possibly do, but I knew that I wanted to go into business and I knew that I wanted to lead a business unit. So today I feel very blessed that, you know, I look after a retail bank for 14 countries, one of which is South Africa. And this is all because of 20 plus years of deliberate work around building leaders for the country. And not just for South Africa, for every country that we're in, very big focus on, there's a clear understanding that there's a delta that gets created by leaders. So that's one of the big thing that Standard Bank sees itself. From the days of Jacko to Ben and Sim to Sim now, it's a consistent thread that continues. In South Africa, I'm never alone, you know. 83% of the people who work at Standard Bank of South Africa are Black. 75% of middle management is Black. 50% of senior and top leadership is also Black. The South African retail bank, the one that's sort of one of my 14 countries, half of the team is under 40. And that makes sense. The average age of South Africa is 27, you know, and when you include sub-Saharan countries, it's 18, right? Over 50% of the people are under 18. So there's a very strong youth flavor. 50% are women, very formidable, scary young women. One of them, Belinda Ratojo, is on the line. She's our head of digital, very scary girl. Tiamo Molanda, also on the line, is our head of youth. Zinath Mula, our head of data analytics. These names just roll in. And it's not just about typical soft areas. You know, these are strong. Our head of credit, the guy who looks after the single largest book on the continent, is Tabani Ndwandwe. He's 39 years old. He comes from Eshowe. He joined the bank as a grad and he has grown to the role that he's doing now. And underneath him, there's other youngsters, you know, people who think very differently. Komojo Molabe is on the line, is our head of IT operations and data, so what the team that we call engineering. I mean, you can go even in our wholesale bank, the guy who makes all the decisions about corporate and investment bank, the guy head of credit, is Luvuyo Masinda. I think Luvuyo is 41, 42. But these things didn't happen by mistake. It's through very deliberate lines that have gone through, and very pragmatic. What I've seen about Standard Bank is that we don't really make surprise appointments, because we think that, which is a little bit of what Tuputsi's was saying. I think that sometimes we think that leaders, sort of like your boss determines your success, but it's also the environment that you're in. The people you're gonna lead must be part of choosing you as well. Otherwise, they'll spit you out. These large organizations have huge amounts of antibodies, enormous. And you have to play into you need to understand how to switch them on and off. Like, if you need a heart transplant, one of the big things that happen first is that your immune system gets switched off, or toned down a bit, then a new heart comes in, then slowly build up again. And I think that there's been quite a lot of good system that enables to do that. I want to just talk about 2 phases that we're in, and I'm going to attribute leaders to those, because I think just to talk about the importance of leadership. When I joined Standard Bank in 2008, I was hired by Sim to be CFO. Then he left 3 months later, and I was terrified, because I'm like, how does this guy bring me here? And then he leaves after that. But it turned out to be one of the greatest moves that ever happened. The guy who took over from him is Peter Schlebusch. He is a white South African. And yet this guy, on Women's Day, he stood up and made a public commitment to all the women of Standard Bank that at least in the retail bank at that time, I was the only woman who was in his exco. He said he's making a commitment that in 5 years' time, 50% of his executive committee is going to be women, and 50% of the people in his exco are going to be Black. He made a public commitment. He then followed up and said, the way we are going to do that, we will do it in very specific ways. 80% of all appointments and promotions are going to go to Black people and women. Number 2, we are going to specifically identify people and co-opt them to the next level of exco. So if you are not in an executive role, so at that time, there were many people who were not necessarily, there were quite a few women. I think at that time when he made this commitment, I was now the head of home loans, and home loans wasn't specifically an exco role, but he identified people to actually be part of the exco. And he was actually signaling to people. And you know what he did? He told the boss, that your person you want to report to, your job is to make sure that this person is successful. Don't rig it. Ultimately, it's all about results. We're all writing the same exam. So we're not talking about mollycoddling, but your job is to prepare the person to be successful. I remember this one groundbreaking day where there'd been rumblings, particularly amongst our white colleagues at the time, to say, how is it possible that we can say 80% of all appointments and promotions are going to be Black? What do I say to my son, kind of thing? And he had a town hall. And there were anonymous questions that were posted, and somebody raised that question. I've been with the bank for 20 years. I grew up here. My father used to work here. I'm a white male. How do I tell my son that they only have a 10% chance of being appointed at Standard Bank? And then Peter went on to say 2 things. And he said, number 1, he says, and I hope he doesn't mind the story. He says, his son asked him that there was a time in South Africa where white males were required to go to the army. And his son asked him, did he refuse to go to the army? And he says he was so embarrassed to tell his son that he didn't. And, and now he doesn't want to miss, he's been given another chance of being part of the unfolding story of this continent and of this country, and he wants to be on the right side of it. And the second thing, he says that the maths doesn't support what you're saying. People who are South Africans who are white are less than about 10% of the population. So if you've got 20% chance of getting in, you've got double the odds. That's a much higher proportion than anyone else. But I guess what I'm saying is that he took on the issues and stood by it. And he received enormous amounts of criticism, And in many ways, we were also pragmatic. In some teams, you couldn't do 80% appointment. If you think about the data teams, and even credit, we just gave them a little bit more time to be able to come through. So By the time that he moved, he sort of finished his, I took over from him in 2012. He had actually met his commitment. 50% of people in his exco were women, and 50% of his exco, not only exco, senior manager were Black people. And so this is, for me, is one of the wonderful stories of this country, that it's leadership. It's not every leader, irrespective of what race, every leader whose heart beats of this continent actually is capable of actually seeing the importance of having everybody participate. So that's one quick story. The last story I want to talk is that of Zweli Manyati. Zweli Manyati grew up in FNB. For whatever reason, they didn't keep him, and it was an amazing find for us. So Zweli joins Standard Bank, and he looks at the strategy. Zweli is a different leader, introverted, doesn't talk much. Most people think about leaders in a particular way. He's different. So he doesn't say anything. Eventually, he says to us, when he becomes the boss after Peter Schlebusch in the role, the Pan-African role, all he says to us is the following: there's this process I want you to do. It's called VUGA. It's compulsory. Trust me on it. You don't want to do it, but trust me, you're going to do it. Ish. And we all like postpone, don't want to do it. And eventually he says, you're doing it. And this process is roughly as follows. You spend about maybe a day in the classroom, and then you spend 36 hours somewhere in South Africa with $70 in your purse. And you're gonna sleep somewhere, and that includes overnight. Ish. And so we're like, this is just like weird. But let me tell you something, this process did something to us. We started it probably about 3 years ago now. I wanna just talk about the second part of transformation. The second part of transformation that was unleashed by Zweli is the one that Umam Gloria was talking about. And Luput Sizwe, the one that says, the reason to transform these large organizations is so that they can make a difference in the society that we live in. And what happens is that when you go into these large organizations, I can talk from my personal experience, the pressure to be successful is so great that sometimes you actually forget why you are there. Exactly what Gloria is saying is about what is transformation in this context? You forget. So this process of us really spending 36 hours with ordinary people of this country, including sleeping in their houses and then coming back, made enormous amounts of difference to us. The first thing we realized is, wait a minute, most of our clients are affluent clients. Why is that? Most of us come from the societies that we come from. We have forgotten about them. So there were two groups. The first group is white South Africans have never actually been to real South Africa. And for them, it's an introduction. But for us, it was with deep embarrassment to realize that we have forgotten where we come from. So it was a huge homecoming. So when we came back, there were big, tangible things. For example, we're not only going to bank the top of the pyramid, we changed the entire strategy, including changing products and solution and everything to say, we will start a journey of banking the entire pyramid. We realized, for our shock and horror, that our price of withdrawing cash, our cash withdrawing fee, is higher than the price of bread. And that can't be. So it was sitting at 18.50 Rand. We came back and dropped it to 6.50 Rand. Do you know how enormous that is on millions of clients? But it was the right thing to do. We came back and realized, for example, that most small businesses, the idea of fixed installment doesn't work. A few months later, we partnered with a company called Merchant Capital. We have a loan, we've disbursed over $1 billion now, of a loan where you pay on a daily basis. So if you're not receiving anything today, you don't pay. If you're receiving tomorrow, but it's basically pay as you go. We realize that for most small businesses, the biggest problem is that their stock is too expensive. And yet we've got this enormous network of suppliers in China, given our shareholding, as well as in Europe. How do we hook up the smallest supplier, sponsor shop, to that network, and not only to buy, but also to sell? And we've built that ecosystem, launched it last year. One Stop is called Trade by Standard Bank, which means that wherever you are, you have an ability to access those global markets, but more than anything, you can buy things for cheaper. So that's been part of the things that we've been doing. It's just really about now, it's switching from saying transformation from sort of like people, ownership, etc., to the one that says that It's about purpose. We actually have to make sure, particularly us as this generation of leaders who are sitting on top of enormous amounts of sacrifices, how do we actually build new solutions that create additional value? And not so that we can lose money. Listen, there's prices to be paid in the short term. In the short term, you can actually make your shareholders not to be too happy with you, but you know that you know how you're going to make it up in a reasonable period of time. And that's where we are. And this is why I've stayed. I've stayed because, and I hope to continue to stay because, number one, being Black and being a woman is normalized. Number two, because truly I can say Africa is my home. And through my work, I'm contributing towards building a very different tomorrow. And that I'm in an environment where I don't feel like I have to fight. It's a question of finding the way as opposed to let's do it this way. It's about, I don't have to convince people to do things. You know, we all have shared context around, let's make sure that we drive the growth of this continent. So that's the second part of that. Before I go, I want to say that, you know, when things are tough, I have sisters that I phone. And like, you know, these sisters, the people that you phone and cry to them and they tell you, askis, but get on with it, put on your big girl panties and continue, you know. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for sisters like Usindi Goyan, you know, Ukukusi Pamela, Cindy Zilo. There's like, it's a group, and I don't know why they're sisters, but they're all sisters, you know. But since I'm looking for a brother, and you know, they all have their sisters that looked after them, you know. Mom Gloria, I know you know, the journey that you've had, for example, was with Cindy Goyan. So the journey that you've had has ultimately contributed to the journey that I'm having, and I'm hoping that as part of, I can pay it forward by doing the same thing for the next generation of women. Thank you, Sister.
Thank you so much, Funeka. Again, really very, very insightful and nuggets. What is coming out, and I think it's an issue that a lot of Black professionals talk about, is just the visibility of people who look like you, who talk like you, who come from your background. That visibility sounds to me like it's such a critical ingredient in not only attracting, but retaining our Black professionals, which is part of the problem that we're trying to solve in these discussions, to say, what are the various things that need to be done? But I think also a very, very clear leadership where we don't just have policies that are written on paper and hidden somewhere on the intranet, but very deliberate and intentional leadership, providing direction, being clear about what we will do, how we're going to do it, and this is what we're trying to achieve. Again, outside of the context of the charter, which I suppose further underlies the point that Butsiso made about, you know, the charter cannot do much more for us. And I'm almost inclined, just listening from what has been said, to think that maybe the direction we need to be taking as a sector is around the principles that are contained in your shared value principles, things like understanding diversity, not so much for the sake of BBB transformation, but more around the actual impact on the bottom line that diversity brings. And this is something that I would really like us to maybe find an opportunity to talk about as well. But I'd like to firstly invite the panelists to have a conversation, but I will lead with some questions, but I'm very happy for any one of you to also pose a question to one another. I think, Ms. Bongi, you spoke about, you know, some of the progress that we are making, and one of the things that you highlighted, which is really central to our conversation today, is the increase in the amount of skills development spent towards Black women in particular. Now, and I imagine that this increase has seen a trend, an upward trend over time. Mm-hmm. And what remains as a question, though, is, are we training, you know, are we training in the right areas? Are we doing the right type of training that will ensure that, firstly, we build the technical skills that we need, And secondly, that people will then be able to ascend to the positions that we want them to ascend to.
I would say that we are, because when I look at the yearly breakdown, so I will talk through on the issues. Firstly, let me disaggregate even further. So conversations about top senior management versus general senior management. We are seeing an increase there in terms of African participation for top management rising from 38% to 59%. However, when you go to the actual numbers, because there's a lot in the numbers, so you would want to say, who are these people? And then maybe what is the race group that we are talking about? So in senior management, African numbers jumped from 1,644. From 1,468, this is at the topmost senior management, to 1,644 across the 18 banks where the numbers we were collecting came from. And we went one step further and said, break it further, African, Indian, colored, and let's see white women and foreigners. And we see that for top senior management, the numbers for white women are proportionally higher than all the other groupings, subgroupings, African, Indian, colored, and foreigner. And it is the same picture for senior management. And the only other subcategory where you've got a significant climb is from 1,619 to 1,726, which is the Indian category. So this basket that we're talking about, and we claim to be the growth for African professionals, it's really, you have to dig even further. And start to understand for these institutions, what do they mean when they say top senior management? What do they mean with senior? What do they mean with junior or middle? Because where there is a significant increase, it's in the junior up to middle.
Yeah,
So there's a lot that we need to interrogate when we go through these numbers. They are not as bland as one would want to say. There's a positive trend, that is true, but it is also, you have to go through each of the subcategories to understand that it's not a one line up.
Yes, and I think, you know, Sisbongi, we had a conversation about 2 weeks ago with Karabu Murule in particular, talking about her own experience at Old Mutual. And
Right.
what was quite interesting in that conversation was that the focus for her training was not exclusively around the technical aspects of her job, but it was around things like diversity, around, you know, Funeka made an example of a town hall that they had where they had very candid conversations, which we do not allow ourselves to have as a country and as a sector. And it is in those conversations and that kind of training where we are trained on how to be firstly tolerant of each other and also see the benefit of working together as diverse teams of people. That is in those instances that we seem to be able to retain people. So it's not just about whether, you know, you understand the technical aspects of your work. And I'm wondering, Sisbongi, whether as part of the conversation we have around skills development, we can say we acknowledge that a lot of money is being spent. We acknowledge that we are starting to see an increase in junior management and middle management. We're not seeing that throughput into senior management and other echelons. And it potentially talks to when people get to a particular point, the system somehow rejects their ability to move up. And it sounds to me like a significant part of it could actually be around culture. So I'm wondering whether in the skills development conversation within the context of the Transformation Charter, whether we shouldn't be expanding that conversation to say, it's not just about your banking skills, but it has to be more than that. It has to be your ability to build people, to ensure that people grow, because surely that must be part of what leadership is required to demonstrate that I have built this person, they came in at this level and this is how they progressed, and these are the types of interventions that are put in place. Do you think that there's room for something like that we can be exploring?
Definitely. Okay. In terms of the charter and what has been tracked, we have been tracking rands and cents. So when you look at emphasizing just how much has been spent, there's a lot to celebrate. You say that in 2016, the expenditure on training, on skills development was at 2.5 billion. In 2019, it was at 4 billion rand. However, the next step has to be to interrogate what is in the skills development, because it's not about just the rands and cents. What is important in building a rounded person does include the soft skills. It does include a lot of problem solving, dealing complexity, being very non-linear in your thinking and coming up with solutions in an integrated and interface manner. And it's all kinds of issues. So what we have in our report as BASA is telling us about the rands and cents.
Okay, no, thank you for that. I'm going to ask Megloria, just before you, I'm going to ask Funeka to weigh in on this, just on the skills part. And then afterwards, I will ask Megloria to talk to us, specifically Megloria, around what you had to do as a board member at Nedbank and Old Mutual as we're bringing in new Black skills or other professionals, and what kind of interventions you found were necessary to give them the support that they need. And it would be interesting to see how that also plays into this conversation around skills development that we talk about. But maybe Funeka, you wanted to say something quickly.
Yes, very quickly. I mean, I think obviously training really matters, and there's different types of training and money spent, you know, investing, for example, on someone to go and do an AMP at Harvard, big deal, right? And it's about making sure that we've got the right portfolio of that. But I guess what I also wanted to emphasize, which I've experienced, is that there's two other things that are important. The first one is actually sponsorship. You know, the people who are going to be there when big things are being spoken about, and they also have an ability to talk about people who are not necessarily the usual suspects, let's leave it like that. That's important. And I also think there's nothing more important also than high impact assignments. You know, I think it's about, you know, that's because what sponsors also contribute to do is about making sure that you've got the right opportunity to to practice, you know, the right opportunity to build up your own muscles. I no longer talk about proving ourselves because we have nothing to prove to anyone. We're great. You know, all the 245 people, plus the 6 wonderful panelists here in this group, a vast majority of them are unicorns. They are 1%ers in their communities. These are the best of the best. So it's not about that. It's the things that we need to do so that we can build our own sense of self-belief, so that we can show up in a way that we can actually ultimately contribute towards that. So I think it's training, it's sponsorship, and it's about allocation of high impact assignments. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I wasn't given the opportunity to be the head of home loans, to be the head of credit. I mean, those 2 roles were defining roles for me, and let alone all the other roles that I've had. And it was simply because there was someone, when these decisions was made, who suggested my name. And obviously these decisions are not easy decisions. There's many other people, but I think that it must be put into the basket of development beyond just training. Thank you, Sisi.
Thank you. And I think that's a nice segue into Megloria sharing this experience that I spoke about Gloria, I imagine that you would have had to play this sponsorship role that Funeka is talking about, especially in the case of RICB. What do you think, as I said earlier, what did you find you needed to do as a board, and of course as a Black woman who understands that I'm here to transform? What was necessary to help you make sure that this was a successful initiative on your part?
Oh, thanks, Paula. You know, I can be here for 4 hours. I'm just enjoying to hear so many things. I mean, Funeka just wants you to just, it's just amazing. Sizwe's experience, Bongi. Unfortunately, time is not quite there. So being a board member it can be the most useless thing if you want. It can also be the most useful thing that you want. Because as a board member, you do have some powers to somehow direct things, but make use of that power properly. There's a committee that most people shy away from, not just in the banks, or this one that is called social committee. I can't remember now, social and ethics.
Social and
committee.
ethics, yes, yeah.
Yeah, people just run away from this because it's not cool, right? It's not it's the most powerful committee I've ever found. In fact, with age, because you can also say, I want to chair this one. Please take me out of these complicated committees. Let me chair the social committee because I need to do it. The reason I'm saying this is because that committee, whereas, as Sizwe says, the FSC can't do much anymore, and all the institutions are looking good until you dismember it and say, the social committee today is just going to discuss capital division. I've had retail last year. I'm going to have investment division. I'm going to have the corporate. You will be traumatized to see just how little transformation in some of these divisions are hidden behind. You know, there's some parts which are, and I always use the word that let's not have black homelands again. If you are a group, everybody must have the numbers. And Blacks also want to talk about Basel III as well. It's a nice conversation to have them there. Credit committee, same. Risk, same. And once you strip them apart, you actually find that only this division and that division is running with transformation. The rest are hidden behind, as Sizwe says, make money and all that kind of thing. If you are the chairman of that social committee, and if they are coming to present to that committee, they do not sleep because the numbers lay bare. They actually show the madness. Then the example you want me to make is when we then had to troubleshoot somebody from outside, as Sizwe has said, it's very difficult. And I like this thing that he says about make sure you negotiate your DOAs and everything even before you sit down, because you can be swallowed in the system. And so in this particular case, having to bring a CFO into Bank A, and very bright person, except she is an outsider. There is no amount of brightness that makes you survive that system until the system is made and is forced to carry you. And so we had to meander and do some interesting situation there where we had to spend some 12 months of making sure that she is being fed into the system. We got into trouble with you guys for doing this. And we had to answer these questions and whatever, but we had to do it because short of that, you would be throwing her into a lion's den. And then again tomorrow, there is a case of Blacks cannot make it as CFOs of banks. And so today I'm sitting here and I'm saying, actually, she is actually the top CFO of a big bank because it is what it is after 10 years of that. But we needed to use the 12 months to feed her into the system because she was coming from outside. Funeka, when you were the CFO of that division, you were already an insider and you had the backing and all that kind of thing. And so to take an outsider into a CFO of a bank, when there is a whole lot of other CAs in the group, remember, they can actually sabotage her overnight. And it was not in our interest that we subject her to that. So we had to take the beating from BMF and ABSIP and ABASA. But they haven't come back. You haven't come back to us guys to say, you know what, with hindsight, that was correct, right? Kulu, you must come back. You have to come back.
We will write a letter.
Please write a letter and say, now that we see, because it has to be. But I have to give a second example now. Unrelated, a young, very bright CA again. No, these CAs are troublesome, Caesar. Very young, bright CA. She is in the credit division, which is very important because part of the transformation is that we just can't make out as to what in these formulas is it such that blacks cannot qualify. Where are we missing the point? Can somebody make it work? Can we understand it? Because very complex formulas and all that. She's now in this division, doing very well. Next thing tomorrow, I'm told she wants to be the CEO of a foundation or something in the bank now. I still get angry when I think about this, and I lost it. But I sat down with her, I sat down with the board, and I actually explained why I understand the foundation is very important, but for our own brief, how she stays in this credit division, very important. Of course, I spoke to her, she explained her passion, you know how now passion, I have to follow the passion. And I tracked her career. Funny enough, she became the CEO of a bank at some stage. So all I'm saying is that you have to watch out for all these madness and do the right thing. Just one more point I want to make is that having said all wonderful things about Standard Bank and Munich Re, I have to say that our stay in Standard Bank and Old Mutual, no, not Standard Bank, no, Nedbank and Old Mutual, so much had to change because if you have somebody like Garabo in Old Mutual and she's an actuary, we had to take a Garabo and say, take this actuary, Asia as Lalingo, Asia Kokla in the villages about this thing of yours, translate it to how these people live, make it work for them. Your policy conversations, your product conversation, translate all of this, like Funeka says, to make it practical and to make it work. By the way, when I'm in the credit department, why are you covering livestock for commercial farmers? What's wrong with covering livestock for communal land farmers? What is that difference? A cattle is a cattle. Why is this one covered and not covered? Because it's wealth preservation for both of them. At least tell me, what do they need to do to be in the same situation? This is now saying, I do not want to rock the boat with the depositors. I want you to translate this sophisticated thing for me about the depositors and this miserable thing about this Black community, which was forcefully excluded by the previous system. That's what I mean. Matching, because we do have the intellectual capacity now. We do have the instruments, like these young professionals. They are there, they know, they are educated. All what we need now is to have this bridge, translate this thing to this history that we're talking about, which is then where I'm saying lastly, we have to explain this history to them so that even on their own, they must be preoccupied with translating all these complicated things that they have studied into what needs to be transformed physically, as in the communities where we come from, because we can no longer stay with this thing about it's only affluent people who can access banks and all that kind of thing, when in fact, the same institutions know how to go and get policy money to come in. They know how to get the deposit money to come in, But when it comes to back fund them, it's not happening. So there is something in that system that needs to be fixed. And those things I'm saying, as a board member, you can make use of your stay and make sure that you are working very closely with the executives without being artificial, and just be patient about what will it take for you to make these people being fundable. What is missing in that equation? Now that you know it very well, tell me what is it that is missing. Yeah, but when it comes to the employment and making sure the number, it's a big struggle, no doubt, because you have to balance the autonomy at the same time and whatever. And I think Sizwe is right. FSC can do what it can do. It's now left for the cultures of these businesses to carry it on their own. They must not be policed by the policies. It should not have been there in the first place, to be honest, but yeah.
Okay. No, thank you so much for that, Gloria. You know, I mean, what you are confirming is that it was necessary for, say, Raisibe in this instance to have a sponsor at Nedbank to speak on her behalf, to say, we are introducing this person. We will introduce her over a 12-month period because we understand the lines then that she's entering and we want to protect her. That's number one. And then I think one of the things that we probably need to do some work around, and maybe not in this meeting, is how do we almost formalize and institutionalize the role of sponsors and mentors, because a lot of us are now in these positions, Gloria, where we are either sitting on the boards or we actually are, executives in our own right. And it is very true that when we assume these positions, somehow we have collective amnesia. Nobody remembers what it used to be like. So there is definitely a need, I agree, that for us to have the conversation, or rather the training, if you will, or reminding us, because we don't need to be taught, we just need to be reminded of where we come from, and be reminded of the responsibility that we continue to carry until today, because all of us are beneficiaries of BEE. And you know, what is certainly starting to happen is that a lot of young professionals will tell you that, oh, I got here on merit, BEE had nothing to do with it. The reality is that we are beneficiaries. So we need to be reminded of that responsibility. But I do think that we need to do some work around how do we formalize these these mentorship arrangements, these sponsorship arrangements, so that we can be intentional and deliberate, because you know, this is not going to happen without us being deliberate about it. So I thank you very much for that. Buxizwe, so you have listened to what the ladies have said, and what seems to be growing as a theme from what they are saying is, yes, you are quite correct that the charter is not going to do much more than what it has been able to do to date. There is an important need for us to start interrogating what this input that we are tracking actually means. Where are we spending? Now that we know we're spending all this money, where is the money going? And what is it going to achieve for us from a transformation, from a diversity perspective? The ladies are also saying that we need to be deliberate about sponsorship and ensuring that people are given the opportunities that are necessary for them to strengthen their muscle of becoming leaders. What would your comments on that be? And really also reflecting on some of the input that you gave earlier. Butsizo, are you still there?
Looks like.
Sorry, sorry, man. I just got a call from one of our staff members here.
Did you hear my question though?
Who's just, no, I didn't. You just lost someone from COVID.
Oh no.
Sorry about that. So I just saw an emergency WhatsApp come in here. Sorry, I didn't hear your question. Sorry, man.
No problem. I'm happy to repeat it. I was just,
yeah, please repeat.
Yeah, so I was just sharing with you that the ladies seem to be coming up with very clear views around what needs to happen going forward. So there seems to be, firstly, agreement that the charter is not going to help us to do much more than what it is doing, which is a point you made earlier, that now that we know that we are spending all these billions that we are spending on training, we now need to be thinking about, but what is that training exactly, and what is it going to help us to achieve? So we think that we need to do some work around that as ABSIP and various other partners. But there's also a very clear view that we need to be very intentional about becoming sponsors of up and coming young professionals within the organizations that either we work in as executives or we serve on the board of. And also it sounds like we have to be, again, very intentional about reminding people like myself who might have forgotten about apartheid and what it meant, and reminding me of my responsibility now that I'm in the position that I am, to make sure that I lift as I rise and I'm intentional about the work that we do. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts about some of these observations or the conclusions that the ladies are coming to. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I just want to agree with them. And let me just take the sponsorship and mentorship one particularly, because, just like, you can't have a discussion around gender equity amongst women alone without men as sponsors or as supporters. You also can't have a discussion about sponsorship as Black people alone, because who holds the power? I mean, people who hold the power. So the story of Funeka with Peter Schlebusch is a case in point. So the point I'm making is, I think it's important for ABSIP to identify those people who are in power, the likes of Peter Schlebusch and others, to join the ranks as long as they believe in the cause that ABSIP is fighting, to become sponsors. And my experience is that it becomes even a lot more effective to do that. And this applies to even individual young professionals in these organizations. I think we have to go and find sponsorships where they are. In other words, identify people, not one person, you need multiple people who are going to be your sponsor and speak on your behalf. And I also said, I just replied in one of the Q&As here that, don't assume that hard work alone is going to just speak for you. Don't assume that. People must know what you want. You must make it known, and don't be shy to tell people what you want. And very often we work hard and we work very long hours and we think that's going to talk for us. It doesn't. Speaking for yourself and letting people know, even though some people may think you are arrogant, but it's important to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. I'm told that there's an important question that Trifosa has asked that I'm trying to find. I don't know whether anyone has seen it. Funeka, do you want to read it out? I'm trying to find it and I'm struggling to find
I think it's got two parts. The first part is about how can we be pragmatic and ensure that Black people are not only getting to the top with no responsibility. And the second one is about gender. So I'll give a perspective, Apollo. I think gender is a big thing. I mean, even in our bank, I think that there's definitely more that can be done around that. And it's really a big focus area. I think some teams are doing better than others, but I think definitely there's more that needs to be done. I work for a bank that has, like multiple operations across the continent. And it's no surprise that, every country seems to be one of the conversations that are a big focus area. I think it's probably definitely new frontier. I think it's got very complex things. I have many shocking stories. Sometimes I think I want to do a Me Too, corporate version of Me Too movement around gender. It's quite bad, so I think Trifosa is right. That's a completely separate conversation. And it's about the environment. I think Uputizwa spoke about it as well. There is an environment that I think that the environmental factors broadly that still have to be dealt with. I just want to quote a very simple example. Our our CFO, Uthembelihle, I hope she doesn't mind, Thembelihle Ngema, her role opens to be a CFO, she doesn't apply. So we're like, why didn't you apply? She says she's pregnant. We're like, yeah, so, I mean, you've got to have a baby after 9 months, right? So why are you not applying? So I think the fact that, you know, we needed to have a conversation for her to apply, that she didn't really know that that's not, you know, we're in fact happy for her. We think it's a good thing. We think it's great role modeling that we are appointing women who are either pregnant or on maternity leave, because it's not a permanent condition, right? And it's a good thing for our system. So there's definitely more that needs to be done. And then lastly, I mean, on you know, people taking on jobs with no responsibility, I mean, all I can say is that I think that's still an ongoing battle. I can tell you that most of the issues that I've had in my work, if I stand back, they relate to the fact that at various times of my career, there was always an expectation by some people who are fairly senior that I wouldn't actually do my job, that I would ask someone else to do it for me. And the fact that I didn't do that and that I actually did my job was sometimes met with surprise. And when I was younger, that used to really surprise me, that why would you think I wouldn't do the job? You know, and of course, when you're a woman, words that get used, I didn't know when I was younger. Now I know that these words are not personal. I mean, when you hear it, it's not for you. It's a gender word, like you are controlling and you are controlling, or you are emotional, you know, and, you know, which is basically, you are in any attempt for you to actually assert yourself and to express your view and to be bold can often in some circles be seen as that, you know. So I do think that it's that issue is still there, but I do think that being clear about what roles are, which is what Uputsizo spoke about, is an important thing. I see too many people still taking on role without really clear about decision rights, without clear about organogram, without clear who's reporting to whom. And you know what? It's awkward. And I know many line managers don't like you to ask that question, but I think you must, you know, because, you know, you seem like you are controlling, you know, particularly us as women, there's always this tightrope. You're not nice enough and you're not controlling, you are acidic, etc. Fine. You'd rather have that than have a job that doesn't exist. That's actually the occupational risk that's there. So I do think it's about being prepared, and particularly when you work into a new environment, just to make sure that, you know, you're taking on roles that actually exist.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for that, Funeka. And Gloria, you're right, we could sit here the whole night because I think the discussion is really just so rich. But we need to conclude, and because we are very clear that we really want to develop the how-to of transformation going forward outside of the charter. I would like each one of my panelists to maybe speak for a minute and a half at most, with very clear marching orders on what ABSIP should, when we wake up tomorrow, what should we start working on in order to help us achieve this vision that we have. Mrs. Bongi, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Pulu. My sense is that there are some targets which have a real attainment rate that you can check as ABSIP. So the first one would be on the preferential procurement, because all the entities that are being measured, they have got spend on a daily basis. And if you are tracking seriously, looking for compliance in terms of BEE, the small enterprises that are in the system for each of the companies, the micro enterprises that are being groomed and taken into the supply chain, the real underlying calculations of what is Black ownership that's happening in this entity. And if you want to go for gender dynamics as well, all women, Black women, those are quite easy enough to track. Then there's stuff on consumer education, which for me can look a bit fuzzy, soft, touchy-feely, but it actually isn't. Because if you are a consumer of financial products, without the education, you are just entering a sphere where you are not going to create opportunities for intergenerational wealth. You are not going to create any other opportunity except being a perpetual consumer. So if you could measure finance education and who says they're doing it, for who, at which stage, I think for me, those two are the easiest where we can see an uptick in ways that don't create any drama, because it's a win-win for everybody.
Thank you so much for that. Meg Gloria?
I think there would be two things I would say ABSIP must look at. This mandate, this brief to the professionals as they are going up must be renewed again and again. We always have to remind them that there was blood on the floor. People actually made it work. Yes, merit, but there was merit also that time. We are trying to do something very difficult. We're trying to undo the damage done by apartheid. Please be part of this game and understand it. And then we follow with actually giving the context to that brief. The second one is, I think ABSIP may have to move a bit from being just looking after the professionals. It must start looking at in the bigger part of this industry. If, for example, VBS, everything that is said to have happened there, if that's what it is, I would expect ABSIP to sit down people, because again, on the other side of that is our grandmothers and aunts' monies, is our Black communities and all people and all that kind of thing. If it is what it is, ABSIP must make it its business too to sit down with those professionals. This time, they are now accounting to you in terms of why are we where we are, and why is it that we can be associated with a big destruction of our very communities now, and it is conspicuously by us. And what does that mean? Because the stakes are high. I think I would like to see ABSIP doing that side of things as well, which means ABSIP looking after the management side and the professional side, but ABSIP must give itself some job now to say policyholders, depositors, beneficiaries of retirement funds, if what it is said to have been done by some of the asset managers, as we understand it to be, because those asset managers are managing whose money? Our money as well. If some of the things that have happened there have happened, ABSIP must actually sit with those professionals and say, the impact of this is this. And how can we undo this? How can you get us into this? So I'm just saying those two briefs. Brief the professionals and also secondly, look at the other side of the coin.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. But so I'm very, sorry, not I'm very mindful that you've just received very bad news, and I don't know whether you would be in a position to respond to this question quickly or.
Yes, yes, I can. So, and I just want to build on what Ma'am Tomato is saying. Member-based organizations like ABSIP always face this challenge of redefining themselves beyond just serving the interest of their members. In other words, not serving the interest of their members just sort of directly, but also looking at how they can change the environment which will make it better for their members in the medium to long term. And just what Tomato is saying is, you know, the first thing, just thinking about it, you know, all organizations like ABSIP, including yours, always battle with the issues of money. You know, because you get subscriptions, you raise some money through conferences and so on. I think redefining your role to include serving the interest of your members, but also more broader and playing a much broader role in society, it becomes really important. In fact, it can be a very important source of funding to do a lot of things that you need to do going forward. Let me just make an example. You know, I made some recommendations here around, for instance, understanding and engaging with the political economy, engaging with policy, legislation, regulations, doing research. All those things require money. But actually, when you think about them, you can actually raise money specifically dedicated to those things. Because one of the things that we really lack in this country, and it became worse in the last 10 years, was that even our ruling party's policy-making power and resources was in fact completely emaciated. And you know, people are trying to rebuild it now. So organizations like ABSIP can really play an important role in shaping policy, in making contributions in policy, and especially in financial services, because you know, I talked about, you know, what happens and things that are still barriers that are sitting in the prudential regulator. Some of them are sitting in FSCA, and we can unblock a lot of those things, and they can create, you know, diversification in our economy. You know, I talked about, if you just, let's just take the ownership of African Bank by the SARB. You know, that actually is quite a potent level of ownership, which ABSIP can engage with in terms of not at a direct transactional level, but at a policy level. What is the prudential regulator, what they start thinking about that stake from a transformation standpoint? You know, so I'm just using that as just one example. Obviously, some of these things require quite a bit of money to do, which is why I think you can actually have a very different and an additional fundraising angle to this, to build your research capability, because those things require that you have data and evidence and you know, people who are researchers that you engage to do work, so that you speak from a position of knowledge, not just from sort of airy-fairy high-level, you know, stuff. I do think, for me, if I could just offer my 2 cents worth in redefining your role as a member-based organization, you've got to continue serving the interest of your members and talking about things at a micro level, about transformation, but there are broader macro issues that this country faces, and we haven't changed much beyond the FSC, as I indicated earlier. And I think there's another level of discussion that we've got to have in the country to drive the process forward, which indirectly and even directly in the medium to long term will benefit your members. Yeah.
No, thank you very much for that. I think that's clear, and it's in line with some of the thinking that we've been trying to develop now, to say, how do we start driving the conversation? And you can't drive the conversation if you've not done the research work. So thank you very much for that. Funeka, 1 minute comment.
Sure, very quickly. The first one, I would say that just to be very explicit with us as members of ABSIP, that the ask is actually that, as Gloria said, it's about homecoming. It's actually about creating of additional value, to take these skills that we've got and everything that we've been given, and actually be about creating of additional value for the entire society, not just ourselves. And therefore, ABSIP can then be a channel, being number 2, where one of the big things being about matchmaking of the right people with the right sponsors. I think it's easier to do that if the mandate is absolutely clear. It's not about you only. Whatever you get must be 10% of the additional value that you have created for this country. If it's more than that, it doesn't work. And lastly, the work that you do around advocacy is important. Continue to do that. Call out bad behavior, call out things that don't make sense. That really matters. It actually gives us some level of protection inside these large organizations as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And call out VBS. as well. Because Meg Gloria is saying that we didn't. This has really been a very good conversation, and I really must express our heartfelt appreciation as the ABSIP team for all four of you to make yourselves available for 2 hours and to allow yourselves to have such a very candid conversation, because I think this is what is going to help us to go forward. And thank you for the homework, and I will add to this homework some of the comments that were made earlier, because you know, the work around understanding the political economy, the work around the engagements that need to happen with the DFIs and similar other things also needs to be part of that homework, because without us doing that homework, we may not get to where we need to get to. We have a group of researchers that are helping us to collate all of these insights that are coming out of these conversations. And we are planning to do a round table, I think in August, where all of this will culminate into that round table, and we'll have a conversation with all the powers that be to share with them some of the issues that have been surfaced in these conversations, and some of the recommendations that we would like to take forward, as I said, as we build the blueprint of transformation in the financial services sector. So this input from yourselves is really very important to us, getting us there. And I must thank you and wish you all a very good evening. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Pulu,
Thank you,
Meg.
Pulu.
for
Thank
inviting
you.
me
Thank
into
you,
the
Pulu.
panel. Thank
Yes,
you.
Thank
all
you.
wonderful.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
So good to see you, Funeka.